You're not supposed to point your fingers at the stars, nor write in the snow, but when it thunders, touch the earth. Ergo, I sent a tapering hand skyward, with my beknitted finger drew a splintered K in the silver scurf beside me. No thunderstorm in progress at the moment. Otherwise, I'd have come up with something. In my briefcase, the wax paper rustles. That is the opening, distinctly Schmidtian paragraph to Arno Schmidt's Scenes from the Life of a Faun. This was originally published in 1953. Pre-translation, the title is Aus dem Leben eines Fauns, but Scenes from the Life of the Faun. This is the 1983 edition, the only translation, I believe, by John E. Woods, that many people will know as possibly as the translator of Primary, one of the most well-known translators, generally speaking, of German works, but also of Schmidt's work, but also most notably of Thomas Mann's work. Arno Schmidt is this is the first Arno Schmidt that I've read. Of course, he's been on my radar as someone who likes underappreciated genius. He was heralded and is, I imagine, still heralded as the James Joyce of Germany, the sort of preeminent and most notable modernist author of Germany. From my research, he seems somewhat known in Germany. It's not as if he's some huge figure. However, of course, outside of Germany, one of the primary difficulties of Schmidt being in print, being well known, being studied, and even being read, is that he is notoriously difficult to translate. Not just because it's a general translation, of course, from German, and Schmidt is playing around with language. He is playing around with language to the nth degree. Many, if people have heard of Schmidt, they probably won't actually have heard of the more well-known and arguably more accomplished works, such as Scenes from the Life of a Faun, or Brands Heath, or some of his shorter novellas. They will have probably heard of the great elephant in the room, one of the most notorious books arguably ever written, Zethel's Traum, or Bottom's Dream, which is a 1,500-page linguistic, almost arguably nightmare of a book to read. I don't have a copy. It's an extremely rare book to get a hold of now, but many people have heard of Schmidt because of this sort of notorious big beast of a book. That is notorious not just because of its length and size. It is a sort of seems like an almost 20-pound book, but because Schmidt's writing, Schmidt's usage of language is akin to entering into a puzzle. It's akin to entering into playing around with Meccano or even linguistic Lego. It is like entering into some sort of strange systematic fragmentation where you are piecing together the mind of an author. That might seem like quite once again, like many of my reviews, hyperbolic thing to say, and I will get to Schmidt's theories around what he called etyms, or what are called etym theory, later. But Scenes from the Life of a Faun is still a novel. It's definitely an experimental novel. As I said, the first paragraph, as with all the paragraphs, are distinctly Schmidtian, in the sense that the unique style of Arno Schmidt, each paragraph commences with italicized words, with the first line unindented, while all the subsequent lines are indented, and the entire novel is written as a series of fragmented paragraphs, each attending to an ongoing, possibly a thought, but largely the subconscious understanding and approach of experience of the protagonist, Heinrich Düring. Heinrich Düring, in Scenes from the Life of a Faun, is a man in his early 50s. He's a World War I veteran. He serves as our narrator. He's employed as a county clerk within the local government office, and he's married to a woman who is denying him intimacy. This is made very explicit. And the novella, which is only runs to some 155 pages or so, is basically the it basically is made up of these distinct Schmittian paragraphs that are Düring's reflections, ideas, philosophy, perspectives, and they're often satirical, cynical, sort of like a very peculiar Rabelais meets stereotypical German bureaucracy. They are some of the blackest, darkest humor one can imagine, and the story unfolds across three historically important timeframes. So February 1939, and then May to August 1939, and then finally August to September 1944. Key moments during World War II. I will begin with a little bit of another short excerpt relating to the language, relating to what's going on with the language with Schmidt, then delve into many other things. There's despite its short length, this book really is a treasure trove of a puzzle, like sort of acquiring some, as per Heinrich Düring's occupation, it's like acquiring some county clerk filings that you need to piece together a story, you need to piece together something, and the puzzle is both linguistic, personal, historical, and philosophical all at once. And I can describe Schmidt's style, and I mean this in the politest terms possible, as autistic. I mean that in a warm and kind sense, in the sense of finding rules, attending to rules, and attending to the most minute details of words and language, and utilizing them to their utmost degree to try to define as explicitly as possible the experience of someone. That sounds, of course, like what any novelist or writer is doing. You're attempting to use language to articulate an experience. But Schmidt is not, we get the impression immediately that Schmidt is not a visual, he does not have a visual imagination. Schmidt's approach and experience of the world is of words, is of etoms, of parts of words, of what words mean when they're said by certain people in certain contexts. And this brought in with sort of a modernism and this distinctly German approach as well, in an almost stereotypical fashion, alongside being a great stylist as well. The prose is extremely good. It's immaculate. It's mechanical in a way that isn't artificial or loathsome or drone-like. And how this is all held together is quite remarkable. But Schmidt is like a puzzle maker, and each paragraph can be delved into for the words alone to see every single word, of course, would have been selected almost scrupulously by Schmidt. But to begin with a few more thoughts on the language, a couple of more excerpts, Schmittian paragraphs, if you like, from early on. Not a continuum, not a continuum. That's how my life runs, how my memories run, as if some spasm-shaken man were watching a thunderstorm in the night. Flash, amid the poison-green shrubs of a development, a naked house bares its teeth. Night. Flash, the gaping of white visages, the tatting of tongues, the teething of fingers. Night. Flash. Tree limbs stand erect, boys play at pubescing, women stew, girls undo their scampy blouses. Night. Flash, me, woe, night. But, and then this is the next paragraph, 2 sentences. But I cannot experience my life as the majestic unrolling of a ribbon, not I. Proof. So, a lot of intertextual stuff going on there, but my priority to focus on there is that Schmidt's, we'll begin with the language. So Schmidt has a theory of language, the general theory of language, called etym theory, etym from etymology, E-T-Y-M. And it's a way of interpreting language by analyzing the etymology of words in a text. Now, it's not just the etymology in the sense of going back. Schmidt would separate out words into these singular etyms, and then via his own rather idiosyncratic fascination and obsession with Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, he believed that the singular atoms of words revealed by an attentive reader could psychoanalyze the text and reveal a deeper meaning. But alongside this, for instance, in Zettel's Traum, in Bottom's Dream, this isn't happening as much in Scenes from the Life of a Faun, but this is also something that Schmidt is doing, is if we take two words such as school bus or school child, and take the word school, and then the next moment would be a line that splits this to bus and child, so the greater meaning can be found within the text. That's one example that I can give. But the atoms of words, and these atoms, these are seen as atoms of word holding the nuclei of the original meaning. And to psychoanalyze these atoms is to reveal sort of, again, back to that non-visual imagination, the Schmittian imagination, if you like. It's almost, I would describe as someone approaching language in the most, in the utmost secular, Adamite, Edenic language, as Adam is in Eden is told, and Schmidt has as a deep relationship to Scripture, in an inverse relationship. He's an atheist and a solipsist and an individualist. I'll get to this, but in the same sense, I think in the same sense that Adam is naming the animals in Eden, in a secular way, I think in a way we can describe Schmidt's approach to language and approach to atom theory of language as a secularly Edenic attending to language, of the inverse of this, of taking the name, yanking it apart into these atoms, and from that attempting to reveal almost like an evolutionary theory of language as applied in retrospect. But from this, of course, the text is just fragmented. The experience of Düring, our narrator, is one of utmost fragments of small linguistic and language-based snippets of existence. Now, this, of course, lends itself to Schmidt's own imagination, his own approach to the world, but also it does it brings about a rather strange and fluid means to which one sees the entry of the antagonist of much of, I think Schmidt does have a general antagonist, which is groupthink or herd-like think or mass think. He's very disaffected by being drafted into the Wehrmacht and seeing that basically destroy his life via having been caught by the British Army, many other things in his biography along those lines. But the antagonist is this groupthink, and of course in this novel specifically, we see the rise of Nazism. What's interesting via both the atom theory and the fragmentation, though the atom theory, I believe, comes a bit later in Schmidt's career as a writer, and more explicitly at least, what's intriguing is that you begin to see not the visual, narrative, aesthetic elements intrude into the text as a character, as a theme, as a myth, as a narrative plot point. Intrusions from the antagonist, which is Nazism, as representative, of course, of the reality of Nazism, but also as Schmidt's general antagonist, which is mass think against individualism, is that we see these intrude first in language. For instance, one great example is, of course, during the Nazi occupation, Heil Hitler as the sort of affirmative greeting, as parodied now in many, many films. I think, Jojo Rabbit parodies how often this had to happen. Schmidt transforms this actually into his own word. So Heil Hitler, we could argue that because of the haste and apathy around, and then the laziness of the groupthink, Heil Hitler transforms into Heil Hitler. And it's a singular word, so spelt Heillittler, a singular word. And what we see is that this language begins to invade, and the transformation of words via this etym theory is, for Schmidt, the thing that is overhauling experience and the subjective experience of Düring. But alongside this, this isn't just, there is a narrative, there is a philosophy, a written philosophy. So this isn't just some sort of basically textual games which can become tiresome very quickly. After a couple of pages, initially one is hesitant when reading Schmidt. I think, is this just going to basically end up to being the equivalent of literary Sudoku, some sort of puzzle that basically is a self-gratification? But actually, after 2 or 3 pages, one becomes quite addicted to this way of describing reality. You get very rooted in just the sense of language into Schmidt's way of approaching the world. But alongside this, he's obviously, even if you weren't to know this, he is one of the most acidic and pessimists one will come across. The black humor and the solipsism, to name 2 other things. But to give a couple of examples of this from page 14 and then page 42, and it's interesting, like having to find, because these aren't full excerpts, they are just these smaller paragraphs. I found myself having to, when I'm taking the notes for this review, I'm having to write page 14-3. So my notes for this have ended up rather Schmittian, as in 3 is the paragraph that is related. So this is from 14. There is simply no communication between generations. My children are strangers to me, just as my parents always were, which is why relatives are consistently less important than lovers and friends in biographies. We stand around looking at one another like waiters. Children only break up a marriage that much faster in our circles. And then from 42:4, I reserve for myself any and all actions against the state. That much is necessary for basic personal safety. For the state is able to use force to constrain me to participate in all the things its responsible, irresponsible leaders may suddenly feel like thinking up. Whereas I, for my part, do not have the power to force the state either to be prudent or just or to fulfill its duties. Therefore, I must constantly offer resistance to the arbitrary power of the state, nor am I forgetting that most fundamental of rights, being allowed to leave said state unendangered and with all my property intact. And don't anyone come along with the lofty objection that as a petty civil servant I simply lack a broad overview of things. All your generals and politicians may roar as brazenly as they like about the golden age that has burst upon us. In 10 years you'll have totally demolished Germany. And then we'll see who was right. Little ere Düring, or all the big shots and 95% of the German people. I mean to say, I am completely disgusted at the notion of joining them in the dance, of being forced to join in against my better judgment, and I will shape my actions accordingly. This is written with a lot of exclamation marks. He constantly uses non-phonetic characters, brackets, exclamation marks, question marks, dashes, dots, lines, just littered with these things as well. But the primary thing here is Schmidt. There is an underlying philosophy from Schmidt. So in his early works, he begins to outline a philosophical worldview, which is, it's helpful that we have a condensement of this from his early novellas in a collection called Leviathan. So as I said, he is an individualist, and he has this experience during World War II, completely disaffected by Nazi Germany, develops, or at least likely expands his extremely pessimistic worldview. And in his 51 Schwarzspiegel Dark Mirrors, he describes his utopia as an empty world after an anthropogenic apocalypse. And so, though he's not a deist in the conventional sense, he's an atheist. He maintains that the world was created by a monster called Leviathan, whose predatory nature was passed on to humans, and he thought this monster could not be too powerful to be attacked if it behooved humanity. That is from the Wikipedia. That is brought forth from my own readings of Leviathan and the 2 other stories in that sort of triptych there. it's far more difficult to bring from that, and this force pervades his literature. And so when we're talking about Schmidt and his philosophy, there is a philosophy against groupthink and the individual, and he is himself. It's clear that he's in terms of being a writer, an individualist. It's not like he had an early period and then developed this style. This is pretty much there from the beginning, but not as robust as, say, Zethel. And so we are put into the singular mind of Schmidt amidst a world that really doesn't care for this and doesn't is against that, perhaps with its strange false romanticism. But there is, alongside this, sort of moments of explicit philosophy, as we find in 52:5. At one time I had, and now the first blow, a very wise boss, and not a word of that this was true. It's very difficult to read, because let me just give you an example. At one time I had, that's being said in quotation marks, then there is in brackets, and now the first blow with an exclamation mark, and then a colon, a very wise boss, once again being said by the other person, and not a word of this was true, again in brackets. This goes on and on and on. So there is this subjective experience that is a sort of carbon filtered reduction of language to get this down once again to that sort of autistic approach to absolutely objectively in a literary etim sense know exactly what is going on. Who explain things to me this way: let us presuppose creatures within a two-dimensional sense of space who live here on a single plane. I described it in the air with my hand just above the tabletop. And if I were now to penetrate their living space with the fingers of my hand, I let them hang down like the tentacles of a jellyfish. What our two-dimensional creatures would perceive now would be 5 circles, he said with furrowed brow. So he was able to follow this thus far. Yes, 5 separate creatures, I said darkly, individuals. But what they never guess and are incapable of determining is that further up in 3-dimensional space, they are subordinated to another unit, my hand. Or, if I first thrust my thumb down into the plane of their world, which I did, and then pull it back out again, i.e. it disappears for the creatures down there, and then a little later stick my index finger in at another spot in their world, for them that means 2 distinct creatures, widely separated by time and space. But nevertheless they are bound together in the higher unity of my 3-dimensional hand. He frowned and thought it over, bothered somewhat, but I went right on, icily. Tu l'as voulu, Georges Dandin. So, this is consistent. It's also consistent in Leviathan, and this, I should say now, that Scenes from a Life of Faun is largely read. I mean, this edition I just actually happened to, this is fairly rare, but I happened to find it very cheap, and I was very lucky. It's usually read in the collection Nobo Daddy's Children, which contains Scenes from a Life of Faun, Brands Heath, and Dark Mirrors, which is soon to be republished, reprinted by Dorky Archive, so more people will be able to get it accessibly. This philosophy is specifically relating to time and space, geometry, dimensions, and again this Leviathan-like creature, this predatory monster that has somehow sort of possessed humanity, or created. There's a Gnostic element that is related to Schmidt's rather idiosyncratic readings of the Book of Job. All of this is either explicit or so nuanced that one doesn't know exactly how to hold it at all times. But it builds into this pessimistic, unique, singular worldview, complete with that focus on etims and language and getting right down to the objective etymological core meaning of things. For instance, one part where Schmidt really begins to play around with language is a scene when he goes into a department store. This is on 94, and there is almost zero grammar at the beginning of this. There's a list that is somehow prose, but is somehow this arguably just lucid experience. Oh wait, that was it. In the department store, Third floor. Hands are yapping, bright-dyed fabrics, jaws gape, barrels, eyeballs, rummage, distance, buzzes, may I help use, boxes, slumber, armchairs, settle, clothing, jungles, coated forests, ribbons, bubble, elbows, jostle, buttons, ogle, stockings, muffle, index fingers, demark, pieces, calves, and hips, stretch from butts. Instant love is undertaken for a raven Titus head, and while kerchiefs loiter around the necks of others, she slyly cleaves the rustling fabric. Her breasts of average size come bobbing up. The triangle of her waist grins out above the crevice, and the aged lady floor walker busily does her watching. There I wait among the nylon reeds of massive female legs. It should be said, with regard to those two references to breasts and female legs, that there is an undercurrent in this book, and as I understand it, through a large amount of Schmidt's work, of course, during as the protagonist is having these sorts of troubles with his wife, which he makes explicit in a rather fascistic sense, in my own opinion. But this sort of strange, we could argue, fascistically repressed sexuality and an annoyance, and is consistently mentioned in almost comically sickening terms such as the ones written there. I don't know enough about Schmidt to know if this is a prod at certain forms of writing and certain forms of, we'd say, like maternal fetishization in Germany at the time, or things along these lines. I don't know, but it certainly it does stifle in a rather not grotesque, but turbulent sense. It stifles the text and intrudes into the prose, and it rehumanizes during, in a way that's needed, lest he became basically a sort of linguistic robot of formality and hypermodernism and sort of an etim machine. So maybe that's why it's needed. But I want to also emphasize, though, again, as I get to the end of this short review, that the prose still stands as something really good. It's sort of a testament to the fact that good prose doesn't need to be purple in the sense of McCarthy or Thoreau or Corvo or whoever it might be, that even with all this in tow, and this is right near the end where multiple characters, and of course the protagonist in his experience, are caught in a bombing raid, and this is right near the end, where it really stands that the prose can still be retained within this seemingly bureaucratic sense. With black human fish flopping about, one girl, naked from the waist up, burst toward us barking impudently, and the skin dangled at her shriveled breasts like curly lace. Her arms fluttered back from her shoulders like two white linen ribbons. The red dishcloths in the sky blustered and scrubbed blood. A long flatbed truck full of baked, boiled human beings, gilded by soundlessly on rubber tires. Ever and again, giant hands of air grabbed hold of us, lifted us up, and tossed us. Invisibilities jostled us against one another till we quivered with sweat and exhaustion. My beautiful, sweaty, stinky girl, let's get out of here. A buried tank of alcohol shook itself loose, rolled out like a sheet of mica on a hot hand, and dissolved in a Donnybrook, out of which fiery brooks flowed. A dismayed policeman commanded the one on his right to halt, and was vaporized in the line of duty. A fat lady cloud stood up above the warehouse, puffed out her round belly, and belched a pastry head high into the air, laughed throatily, "So what?" and rumbling the while knotted up her arms and legs, turned toward us stetiopygically, and farted whole sheaves of hot iron, tubing endlessly the virtuosa till the shrubs beside us curtsied low and babbled. An incandescent corpse swooned and fell to its knees before me, offering its smouldering serenade. One arm was still flickering and broiling petulantly. It had come out of thin air, from heaven above, an apparition of Mary. The world was altogether full of them. Whenever another roof blew off, they shot out from the cornices like deep-sea divers, helmeted or in their naked hair, flew a little distance, and then burst like paper bags as they landed on the earth below, into God's own scalawag hand. And it goes on for quite a few pages, this sort of Bosch, Hieronymus Bosch-esque, which is alluded to in the novel. Bombing raid of great depravity and death, and basically strangely beautiful, morbid prose. But this review has sort of been not just a review of Scenes from the Life of a Faun, which has a few more key elements going for it, especially this character called the She-Wolf, and Deering's obsession with a Napoleonic deserter, and his sort of escape and exit. It hasn't just been an entry. I mean, this is a good entry point. It seems that a lot of people mention that this is a good entry point. Many consider it one of his most accomplished works. But it's also been an overview of what Schmidt is trying to do. So if people are interested, there are all these elements. And if you fancy sitting down and engaging in a etymological puzzle, a literary puzzle, is enjoyable, but not just enjoyable in the sense of, like I said, self-gratification. As you can see from the prose there at the end, it is still great writing. It is still very enjoyable and very enthralling to read. And it's addictive. I'm not sure, maybe one day I'll get my hands on a copy of Bottom Stream and see. I'm not sure how I would feel about this prose, or feel about this engaging in this style, say. I could have maybe done another 50 pages before I got a little bit exhausted. And a lot of his works seem to be very short, and it works that way. So it would probably be different to tackle Bottom Stream in that way. But that's my thoughts and I guess review of Arno Schmidt's Scenes from the Life of a Faun, which I'm not affiliated with him or sponsored or anything, but it will be in Dorky Archives re-edition soon. I think it's being released in April, which includes Scenes from the Life of a Faun, Brands Heath and Dark Mirrors, so pick that up. But thank you all for listening, and I hope some of you go explore Schmidt's work.